Welcome everyone, and welcome to this meetup. I'm Bruno from Noodlewerk apps. You can see our fancy logo here, but you're probably more interested in either website. So noodlewerk.com is the website of my very small agency, and Binary Adventures is where I intermittently blog about random stuff or smaller snippets that are not worth it to put on the company website. And today I wanted to talk about something that is becoming increasingly more important to me, and I hope to be able to transfer this feeling of importance to you people as well, so you can keep it in mind. So I wanted to give you some lessons in accessibility that I most recently learned, and I want to try and to get all of you to get started on accessibility, or at least to keep it in mind more. So first, I want a small show of hands. So who here develops with accessibility first most in mind?
Well, I did.
One. Okay. So still a couple of more than zero. That's good. And who of you gets to draw the line 100% accessibility or bust? So we don't release unless this is good enough. Zero. No worries, it's probably zero for most people, and at some point you're going to have to make very tough choices about how much you want to to support and how many people you want to support. But it's always good to get started and to get talking about it. So, and that's what this talk is going to be about. Well, first off, table of contents. Well, a small quick note on why do you want to support accessibility? How can you as a developer get started with some easy accessibility improvements? What is the low-hanging fruit of accessibility? So what can you keep in mind, hopefully continuously? Some lessons that I learned and that hopefully you will learn over the course of all the low-hanging fruit. Where to from here? And let's go on. So, why accessibility? Well, actually, the reason to support accessibility as much as you possibly can is very easy. You can make the world a better place. And you might think it might not have a lot of impact. Maybe it won't even have a lot of impact. But the primary thing is that you will nearly always make your app better, more useful, and more of a delight to use to at least one person. And one person will thank you for it. And that's one of the most important things and why we are in this business, in my opinion. Apple is of the same opinion. We believe that accessibility should be accessible to everyone and anyone. It's one of their core principles. You can see it in how much they support it and emphasize it. It's something that happens a lot with a lot of tech companies, but it's not nearly as emphasized as much as when Apple does it. And it's important because there are a lot of type of accessibility issues, people with accessibility problems, and they are always coping and trying to lead normal lives. And you can do a lot of stuff that people wouldn't normally think about, even if you have a disability of some kind. And most importantly, having an accessibility issue, having a disability can happen to everyone. Basically, it even happens to everyone, because everyone has some kind of accessibility issue at some point, or maybe even just a preference that you want to use. For example, someone could end up with your dominant arm broken. So there's your first accessibility issue. And what happens when you are using your very, very large iPhone Plus with only one hand? You have issues. Well, reading glasses, there's a lot of people with reading glasses that's just filling the dynamic text size higher. And actually with the advent of plus-size phones and X phones and all that stuff, everyone has become a little more disabled just because one-handed phone usage has become less of a thing. You can't even reach across the entire screen anymore. You could even label that as an accessibility issue during your UI design sessions. And now I pressed something interesting. So, and we're back. So, and just to show how easy it is for people to actually use an accessibility feature without the developer actually thinking about it, I've shown here the Meetup app that is changing from the least high font size, which is custom, so you can actually let people read more text on screen, but also the highest font size, which basically means less text, but it's way more readable for people. And even dynamic type and dynamic font sizes are something that you don't see a lot in apps, because you have to think about it preferably beforehand and want to use it. And one of the other reasons to to access and to think about accessibility is that it will always lead to better code. It will make you think about your design, it will make you think about your architecture, and it will help you make decisions that other people will thank you for it, even if they're not disabled. So, next up, getting started. So, what are the very basics that you can do as a developer to get started with accessibility? First of all is get acquainted with the subject. Apple themselves have a very nice YouTube channel, and one of their playlists is the Design for Everyone playlist. And it has a ton of videos about people that are using iPhone devices, iOS devices, and other in an accessible way to help them lead more equal lives just like everyone else. And most of them are inspiring. Some of them are slightly sad because people have more issues than you might think, but it's a very good way to get to know this audience. Second is use it yourself. I'm not sure if everyone knows about this or uses it, but you can actually very easily set up an accessibility shortcut, which usually is the triple tap on your home button or triple tap on the lock button to help you access some accessibility features that you want yourself. For example, these are the personal ones that I use usually when testing or just because I want to, is reduce white point, smart invert of colors, and voiceover, which you can see here. And it's just as easy as you get an action dialog. You select your accessibility feature that you want to enable or disable, and it's done. And this will help you as a developer to just play around with it, use it in apps, and just see around, especially, for example, with voiceover, what happens when you go into an app, enable voiceover. Can you actually use this app? And most of the apps I use have a subpar experience in voiceover. Some of the apps are amazing, which is good. Apple's apps fall under this. And some of the apps are completely terrible, because I've seen very high-profile apps enable voiceover, and the only thing that you hear is bump. The entire thing is one custom screen with no accessibility features whatsoever, which is terribly sad because you're missing out. And also, read the documentation. There's a lot of it. The accessibility features on iOS, on macOS are constantly improving, and they're adding new stuff, and basically you'll be amazed at what you can support. And lastly, just start doing it. Most accessibility features can be enabled in 1 line of code, 2 lines of code, and it's actually very easy. Such as here, you have your button with usually just a single word, add. But add doesn't tell you a lot if you have a vision problem and you don't actually see the entire screen. So what can you do? You can add an accessibility label, which actually explains what this add button does. And this is very useful. It takes not a lot of time. It will take some extra strings for translating, but you'll get over it. So, to continue, low-hanging fruit. Recently, it's been October. That means that Hacktober has came and went. And I took that opportunity to try out some accessibility features on the CocoaHeadsNL app. And there hasn't been an actual update of the app since then. So all the things that I fixed here, you can actually still check that they're still wrong, which is fun. So first off, low-hanging fruit. Despite what designers might tell you, UIKit really is your friend. Apple has most accessibility features enabled by default in all of their common general components. And if you set up your view controllers correctly, or at least according to Apple's documentation, you'll get a whole lot of it for free, which is very good. So don't try to fight UIKit too much. And if you do, see what you're breaking. See, for example, the custom button with a couple of fancy states. If you are drawing your own button, give them the same states. Actually enable them as buttons, give them states, so that VoiceOver, for example, or switch control can actually see them as actionable objects. Second, all the things. All the things what? Well, you've already seen the accessibility label. So what does VoiceOver read to you when you hover over that UI object? Hint, which can actually be disabled for VoiceOver users, but the hint adds, as you might imagine, extra context to that same action. So what happens when you can say add, for example, or add photo, and hint, for example, would tell you add photo to the current working album, or add photo for sharing to Facebook, and it will give you some more context, and that's usually helpful. Accessibility traits. There are a lot of silly little traits such as heading, image, button, selected, all those kinds of things. There's quite a bit of traits that you can add or remove from objects that helps people. No. See? Just a hint. VoiceOver typically ignores your volume settings. Yeah. And also a fun one, one that even if you are cringy about accessibility and don't want to support it whatsoever, support accessibility identifier. Why? Because UI testing becomes way more accessible to the developer if you add accessibility identifiers. Everything in UI testing can access the accessibility identifiers, which allow you to unit test them, which is awesome. So, second, now we get to some actual examples. For example, improve your navigation bar headers. Usually when you just use a title and just add a navigation bar.title, you're halfway there. Have people see, okay, events, fine, this will probably be the events screen, but maybe you can add some more context. Or you can have this, for example, which is, if anyone notices, not actually a text. It's just an image, and the title by accident is the same as the navigation item's title is by accident the same as what the image says, so that's a win maybe. But for the rest, when a VoiceOver user comes there, it goes CocoaHeadsNL, header, image. No mentioning whatsoever that this is the event screen or what type of events might show up here, and the fact that it's the CocoaHeadsNL app we probably know because we opened it. So that's not terribly useful. But how can you improve this? Well, I've done here a couple of things at the same time, so I'm just going to go through them quickly. The top acadebra for some people, at least for me until I tried it, is I'm removing and adding the accessibility traits. And accessibility traits is actually one large bitmask. So that's why I have to remove something with a bitmask and then add the header trait. But that works. So now someone would only see header instead of image because they don't care that it is an image. You also have the navigation title view. Well, it's an image, that's fine. And you can actually add a more verbose title to your navigation screen. This is something that you can do to any screen. And having events on top visually is fine because people see the entire calendar usually, the entire list. But if you're a VoiceOver user, it might be good to know that whatever is on the screen are the upcoming and past events. So you have some more context about what you are going to encounter. So basically some simple things, even that you can forget about it, but just adding a larger navigation item .title is a good thing. And now when we add this, you see upcoming and past events, and it's the header of the screen, which is way more listenable, readable. Don't know what the word would be. Next, improve your target areas. The CocoaHeadsNL app has, for obvious reasons, also a small jobs section where everyone that sponsors or hosts can add their vacancies, and which is terribly interesting for voiceover users. Per cell, this is actually the only text that it will read out to you. And as you can imagine, for a iOS-centered job screen, this is going to be very, very boring very quickly. iOS developer, iOS developer, iOS developer, senior iOS developer. Fine. I think the only proper one is iOS developer by Blundell, just because they didn't insert their name correctly, their job name correctly. So how do we fix this? Well, one of the easiest ways that I encountered is when you have your cell, make the entire area one accessibility component and make sure the rest is turned off so that it's only the one thing. You can see it here. The job cell, it was a couple of views just below each other, which is completely fine actually, and auto layout will take care of most things. But if you want it easier, I put the important bits in one large container view, and made that the only accessible component of the cell. And you can see it here. So I removed accessibility from the label and the image. Instead, I gave it to the container. And then I made sure the container had an accessibility label that could be read aloud. And then you get some more interesting context. And as well, one of the accessibility hints that says if you double tap this, you will see more information about this job. And again, this is a relatively easy fix, and one that you only notice when you have VoiceOver on and test with it. So this is what would happen if you use the proposed code and then read it aloud. Job title, add a company name, and then if you wait longer, you get the accessibility hint. Next up, grouping accessible text together. What is happening here is that I've let VoiceOver in the About screen just see what happens. And what you see happening is that what for us is actually one large block of text with some interesting cues for heading. For the VoiceOver user is 4 steps. And for often, if you have to do 4 actions, you get bored pretty quickly. But it's basically one entire block of text. So same trick as actually before. What do we do here? Don't mind the breaking code above. I mean, I'm not actually removing all text. But what we do here is we define strings. We give all the labels the strings that we want. And we can discuss why everything is a separate label later. And we give the entire header view, so the entire containing view, we give them a concatenation of all those strings, which means that the entire block has become one accessibility text. And it gets read aloud completely instead of having to move forward. Of course, you have to figure out whether your text is a complete block and should it be read aloud like that. But it's quite an easy fix, and it will probably help people a lot. Next up, no examples here because I haven't gotten this far, but something interesting for view controllers is that there are a lot of VoiceOver gestures that people often forget. So, for example, VoiceOver allows people to have what is the iOS equivalent of the escape key. And you can access it by overriding the accessibility perform escape. And for example, a navigation controller does this automatically, and it pops your current view controller, so you always go back. And if you have custom view or a custom modal setting or something like that, you can enable this, for example, to dismiss it or to undo the last action or something like that. Another one is also the accessibility magic tab. which is an interesting one because it allows people to use the most intended or often used action. So for example, in an audio app, it would be play and pause. During a call, it would be pick up and hang up, those kinds of things. So if you have an action that's actually probably 99% of the time people will use this, add it under the Magic tab. And these are a couple of things that I think is easy to keep in mind while developing. You don't need PO support for that. You don't need to tell QA about this. You can just support it, keep it in mind, and add a couple of extra lines of code, and hopefully be happy that you helped someone. So, what have I personally learned during all this accessibility work, which wasn't really terribly a lot? First off, anyone could do it. Anyone that thinks, well, yes, but I'm just starting iOS developer, and this is all very complicated. Hopefully, I've shown you that it's not really that complicated. It's just keeping one more thing in mind that hopefully won't feel as boilerplate to you. You are going to need more text. Remember the small add button, which is a very easy thing to just translate and hand over to someone. If you want to explain what the add button does, that also needs to be translated. So people are going to ask you why the strings file has suddenly tripled in size. So something to keep in mind is that adding accessibility features often is just explaining what your app does. If you show your app to someone, you're happy, you're proud of it, and people are on the screen, and you start explaining it, this is exactly the type of text, the type of thing that you should also put in an accessibility hint or an accessibility label. Just the stuff that you would explain to someone that's honestly curious about your app. Supporting accessibility also nearly always points out flaws in your design. The easiest one is the part where designers keep adding interesting, important buttons, actions, views on top of the screen, where people can't actually reach with their poor little human-sized thumbs. So if you tell this to people, and you can also add in that it would also help people without a thumb, for example, or people that broke their hand, it all becomes more accessible. It also points out flaws in your architecture and or data gathering. Remember the job screen, which was fun? While I wanted to add job title at a company name, I found out that the company name didn't exist in that entire object. It was job title, logo image URL, which is interesting, but people are not interested in the logo image URL. So we actually had to figure out, okay, are we missing company name? Why isn't it here? Why isn't it in our code? Well, we found it, we added it, and now our code is a little bit better. Practice makes perfect. It all seems a lot. It will be a lot, especially if you start diving into documentation. You'll learn all things about rotors, haptics. You'll finally find out that the new tab bar has a larger accessibility icon, which is also an interesting one. But just start with it. Write the extra line of code that adds a better accessibility label. And if you keep doing this, suddenly you'll notice that you start writing these often, and it will become a second nature. So, now that I have hopefully convinced you all to get started on accessibility, what now? Well, how can you guys go further? First off, talk about this. Mention it to your team. Get your PO on board. Just advocate for it. I mean, people often actually want to do the right thing, but it takes so much time and takes so much effort, and we have to finish this by tomorrow. Yes, but you can still do the small extra line of code that doesn't actually impact anything. You had bad accessibility before. The worst that can happen is that you improve it. UI testing will love you. So basically, every time someone says, yes, but this is not good, well, then you can say, well, but we can actually improve our automated tests with it. And then suddenly it becomes more important because automated tests guarantee quality, they save QA time, and basically make your entire business better. So it's a win-win. There's a fun little app on the Mac that's called Accessibility Inspector, which is kind of a whole topic on itself, and Apple actually has a WWDC video on it. But it's very neat because it shows you accessibility features of certain parts on your screen, including the simulator. It can actually perform audits on processes, accessibility audits in your processes, such as the simulator. And then, for example, it will tell you that you have not supported dynamic type. If anyone is hearing this, the CocoaHeadsNL app does not support dynamic type. That is a nice issue to work on. It also can even tell you from, hey, you have some kind of image view thing hero that appears to contain text. You might want to add an accessibility label to it. So even for regular labels, logos, that kind of stuff, it can even see, hey, this could have an improvement. It's a very neat tool. Well, once you get your feet wet and are ready for it, you can add advanced accessibility, such as actually supporting dynamic type. Why is this advanced accessibility not very basic? Because usually supporting dynamic type requires you to have thought about it before you have finished your entire architecture. So it's an easy fix. Just make sure you support dynamically updating your fonts, and then you're done. If you add support for dynamically updating your colors, people will also be happy, and more colors make designers happy. And you can use kind of the same system for both. And I've left out one very important thing where you go from here. So can anyone guess it?
That's how it works.
Very good. Please test it with users. You can add a lot of accessibility features, a lot of accessibility stuff, but try to find people to test it with. Try to find someone that has an accessibility feature, that wants to use VoiceOver, that uses dynamic text. See how they enjoy your app before and especially after you've added accessibility. So for more information, I will put this all up online so you don't have to take pictures. But I've put in some interesting videos here. The top 3 ones are all Apple WWDC videos. And some interesting ones that from other conferences that I can recommend is Real World Accessibility by Summer Panange, who talks about her experiences in companies with less examples, but more what happened while she was supporting and advocating accessibility. And Architecting a Robust Color System, which talks about how you can add and dynamically updating color themes to your app. And you can use the same idea for fonts and types. And she also talks about how to use color schemes to test for accessibility as well, as a properly normal-sighted person. So, this is the end of my talk. Are there any questions?
Yes. Is there a way to track how many users of your app
Need accessibility? No. So is there a way to track if you need accessibility in your app? You never know how many people need it, because not everyone is technologically savvy enough to actually find the features. But what you can do, most of the accessibility features, you can actually check within the accessibility APIs whether they are enabled. One fun thing that I recently noticed is that I added a, a receipt-like view that had a front and a back. A front for all the information that you actually need, and the back for the nitpickers that wanted more details. And it flipped. One thing that you actually can check, and that I forgot to do, is that you can check, do people have reduced motion enabled? And if they have, instead of flipping, I should just switch it immediately or cross dissolve or something else. So you can check for most of the accessibility features whether they are enabled or not. And you could also measure this. Take care when measuring this that you are measuring probably special privacy-related information. So you might want to ask a legal about that. Anyone else?
So from user testing, I know that people that have this disability, that they build basically a map of your entire app in their head. That they remember everything, like what leads to what. The worst thing for them is actually changes in your app. If you change a button or a view, then they're completely lost because they remember exactly how your app works. But then you change something, they need to completely rediscover it, basically.
Yes.
So do you keep that in mind and try to like reduce the amount of change you make, or do you deal with it some way? Do you educate them on like what changed?
Yeah. So to summarize for the microphone, there are a lot of people that are blind. They make maps of your app in their mind, and any change will become as a pretty horrific change to them because they've lost their entire context. I have not thought about this personally yet. I find it very interesting insight, and I'm going to keep it in mind. Maybe I think that when you start saying, okay, we need to keep accessibility in mind for reals this time, so to say, and you are pretty sure that you are going to grow a lot, so you're going to multiply your user base by a ton, then it probably is worth it to add a warning beforehand, just to get them acquainted with the fact that the entire app changed, and to just break it off and redesign your entire app to be completely accessible, because a better accessible app will be better for all your future disabled and accessibility challenged users. And hopefully you will have warned your old users that the change will happen. Anyone else?
Well, since you began, by asking how many people have experience using accessibility, and I was wondering, since you are working in a small agency, and I don't know, you work with multiple clients.
Yes.
Presumably, how do you do? Like, do you try, convince clients that we need something to do to add it to your app, or do you just add it on the extra time?
Little bit of both. So I, as a small agency, how do I approach clients and use my time with clients to add accessibility features? Basically, the small things that I can add and remember to add in the usually high pressure environments, I just add them. The 10 seconds is not worth the client's time to even think about it. And if they ask about it, okay, fine. Oh, it helps unit testing. Fine, it will be okay. And I'll talk to the teams about it. I'm usually not the only person on the team, so to say, that's working on iOS. So keeping accessibility in mind and asking other people from, okay, is this accessible? And they ask why and how. Is usually a good start. There might not come anything out of it. We're still on the time pressure, but advocating is always the beginning. Answered?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was great. I just wanted to mention there was a really awesome lunchtime talk at WWDC this year. It's called "Convenience for You is Independence for Me." And it's this guy who's paralyzed, and he's talking about how he uses the switch interface to access applications, and he shows a couple of examples. And it's a really well put together talk. It's really funny, and it's something where if you're trying to convince other developers on your team, it's a great thing to show them because it's a very engaging and practical way to show people this is what it really means to someone who is using this stuff in terms of what kind of freedom they can have when your application supports what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Again, for the mic and for everyone here, the WWDC videos, Apple's videos, are full of good, inspirational talks about how accessibility has impacted people and has changed their life for the better. So, watch a couple of them. If your team is on the fence, show these videos to them, so they can also be inspired and actually almost feel what these people go through every day. Thank you.